The air inside Harrison Robotics was dense enough to taste. It smelled of burnt coffee, overworked circuits, and panic disguised as professionalism. On the 32nd floor, under the relentless buzz of fluorescent lights, a team of engineers sat hunched before a massive LED wall. Red error charts pulsed like open wounds across the screen, bleeding lines of code that refused to heal. "Run it again," someone muttered. Fingers clattered against keyboards. The error reappeared, red, defiant, merciless. A low groan rippled through the room. At the head of the table stood Olivia. Harrison, 42, the face of the company's meteoric rise, and now, perhaps, its slow descent. Her charcoal suit fit like armor, her black hair pinned into a faultless bun. The light from the screen carved sharp angles into her face, making her eyes seem almost metallic. "We spent 3 days and $500,000 in consulting fees," she said evenly, voice cold enough to still the whispering. "What do we have to show for it?" No one answered. A coffee mug trembled in someone's hand. Another engineer stared down at his shoes, wishing to disappear. Olivia exhaled through her nose, the sound soft but final. 5 minutes, she said. "Either we find a solution or we start rewriting from zero." She turned on her heel, the click of her heels slicing the silence, and left the room. When the door closed, the tension didn't ease, it just changed shape. The sound of typing resumed, frantic and hopeless, like rain hammering glass. Down the hall, the elevator chimed open. Daniel Hayes, night janitor, stepped out with his cleaning cart. His uniform was faded gray, the name tag scratched to a ghost of letters. One earbud dangled from his ear, leaking a faint rhythm that contrasted cruelly with the tension beyond the glass walls. He had been at Harrison Robotics for 5 years, long enough to know that genius often screamed louder than it listened. He guided the cart along the corridor, mopping where shoe prints glistened under the sterile light. From the conference room ahead came muffled voices, a thud, and then silence. Daniel glanced up. Through the glass, he could see the LED screen glowing crimson, bathing the room in an eerie light. The engineers had stepped out, probably chasing caffeine or excuses. Curiosity tugged at him. He edged closer, the mop squeaking softly. Inside, the long table was littered with empty cups, open laptops, and notes scrawled in desperation. He hesitated, hand resting on the doorframe, then stepped in. The room felt alive with exhaustion. Fans hummed. A single monitor blinked, displaying a maze of equations. Daniel leaned in, squinting. To most people, the lines would have been gibberish. To him, they whispered something familiar, like hearing a song from a life he'd tried to forget. Stanford. Late nights bent over models that promised to teach machines how to think. Then the phone call. The hospital. The sound of a 3-year-old crying for her mother. He blinked hard and focused on the screen. One variable looped back in the wrong direction, reversing its own weight, poisoning every result downstream. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. He stepped back, breathing out through his nose. The mop handle reflected the light from the monitors, a long silver line cutting across the floor. In the reflection, he saw himself not as a janitor, but as someone who still understood the language of logic and failure. Behind him, the elevator chimed again. Olivia's heels struck the polished wood, steady and sharp. She paused outside the glass wall, unseen. Inside, Daniel picked up a discarded marker. The cap clicked open with a dry snap. He traced the error on the board, red ink bright against the white surface. It wasn't textbook logic. It was instinct, the kind that couldn't be unlearned. He drew a quick sigmoid curve, circled 2 swapped variables, and underlined the mis-weighted node. Then he stepped back, arms crossed, head tilted. From the hallway, Olivia watched. Her eyes narrowed, curiosity displacing irritation. The janitor's stance wasn't that of a man cleaning up someone else's mess. It was of someone rebuilding meaning from chaos. Daniel didn't see her. He studied the board one last time, then whispered to himself, "They've been looking at this backwards." The mop leaned silently in the corner, catching the red reflection from the screen, a single streak of color in the cold, sterile light. While outside the glass, Olivia Harrison's expression shifted just slightly from certainty to wonder. The building had emptied hours ago. Outside, the bay slept beneath a silver haze, and inside Harrison Robotics, only the hum of machines and the faint ticking of the wall clock remained awake. The conference room looked like a battlefield after retreat. Paper cups, tangled charging cords, and half-eaten energy bars scattered across the table. The LED screen, once raging red, now idled in a dim blue glow. Daniel Hayes stood at the far end, mop propped in a corner like a silent witness. He held a red marker in one hand, his other hand resting against the cold glass board where the equations sprawled like wounded soldiers. He studied the lines, his brow furrowing. The air conditioning hummed overhead, brushing through his hair. His reflection shimmered faintly on the polished floor, one man framed by artificial light. In 1,000 unspoken hours of what could have been, he lifted the marker. Click! The cap popped off, the sound impossibly loud in the still room. Slowly, methodically, he began to retrace the system's logic. His handwriting was smaller, tighter, more deliberate than the frantic scrawls that had come before. Every symbol he adjusted seemed to breathe differently under his hand. He paused, tapping the cap against his palm. "You don't need more data," he murmured to the empty room. "You just need balance." He drew a tiny curve, an elegant sigmoid that corrected the runaway loop, and circled it. The red lines stood out sharply under the white light, like veins returning life to a cold body. He wiped his hands on his uniform pants and turned to the monitor. The code still blinked, with warnings, waiting for savior. He rolled his chair forward and began typing, the old rhythm returning, fast, decisive, almost musical. The soft clicks of the keyboard filled the air. He hit enter, the fan word. Lines of data streamed like falling rain. Then green. The word stabilizing flashed on the screen, followed by the sweet silence of no new errors. Daniel exhaled. A quiet laugh caught in his throat. "Well, I'll be damned." He leaned back, rubbing his neck. The sound of his heartbeat echoed faintly in his ears, matching the rhythm of the cooling processors. For the first time in 3 days, the system was breathing right. Behind him, a voice broke the silence. "You're not supposed to be in here." Daniel spun around. Olivia Harrison stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The light from the hall framed her in pale blue, her silhouette cutting against the glass wall like a reflection of authority itself. "I just noticed something off," Daniel said quickly. He gestured toward the board with the marker still in his hand. Didn't mean to interfere. Olivia stepped closer. The sharp echo of her heels softened against the carpet. Her eyes moved across the equations, catching on the new red markings. "You changed the variables," she said. "Not a question, an observation." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" He hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound like arrogance. "Because they were feeding each other in reverse." The loop kept tripping on its own reflection. Her gaze flicked toward him, sharp, assessing. Then she reached past him, took the mouse, and executed the test herself. On the monitor, the same green status bars appeared. Stability. Accuracy. 18.4% improvement. The light from the screen painted their faces the same shade of emerald. For a moment, neither spoke. Olivia straightened, her voice calm, but edged with something new. "What's your name?" "Daniel Hayes." "Position?" "Night janitor." She studied him again. "Education?" "Stanford," he admitted after a pause. Didn't finish. Her lips pressed together, the faintest shift from disbelief to curiosity. "You realize what you just fixed?" Daniel shrugged lightly. Bathtub was clogged. Didn't make sense to pour in more hot water. The corner of her mouth twitched. Almost a smile, but not quite. "You think in metaphors." "Only because math's the same everywhere," he replied softly. "Even in dirty water." Olivia turned back to the screen. The red marker rolled off the table, landing with a quiet tap near the mop handle. She bent slightly, picked it up, and set it beside the mop. Two tools, one for mess, one for meaning, standing together under the pale light. "Tomorrow," she said, "8 a.m. conference room C. You'll attend as an observer." Daniel blinked. "Mom, This isn't a suggestion, Mr. Hayes." Her tone wasn't harsh, only deliberate, the kind that didn't invite negotiation. She started toward the door, then stopped. "You should get some sleep. Big day tomorrow." He managed a small nod. "Yes, ma'am." When she left, the sound of her heels faded. Down the corridor, leaving behind a hollow quiet. Daniel looked around the room. The glowing monitors, the faint hum of machines, the smell of cooling circuits, and felt a strange weight shift in his chest. He walked to the mop and leaned it upright again, its handle catching the light from the window. The reflection stretched across the floor, long and thin, touching the base of the conference table. It looked, he realized, like a beam of morning sneaking in too early. He smiled faintly, capped the red marker, and whispered to the empty room, "Guess that's the first light we've had all week." Outside, the city skyline shimmered faintly through the glass, cold silver against the night. And somewhere far below, dawn was already beginning to move beneath the fog. Morning broke softly over San Francisco, wrapping Harrison Robotics in a pale gold haze. The night storm had passed, leaving streaks of light sliding down the glass facade like hesitant forgiveness. Inside, the building felt cleaner somehow, quieter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Daniel Hayes stood in the lobby, adjusting the collar of his only decent shirt. It was a faded blue button-down, pressed as best he could, still bearing the faint ring of a coffee stain near the hem. The security guard barely glanced up as he swiped in. Janitors didn't usually arrive at 8 in the morning, carrying notebooks instead of cleaning rags. The elevator doors reflected his face back at him. Tired eyes, unshaven chin, a nervous half-smile that didn't quite hold. He rubbed the small lucky stone. His daughter Emily had slipped into his pocket that morning, a polished pebble she'd found on the beach. "For courage," she'd said, "for when people forget you're smart." The elevator chimed open. On the 21st floor, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off every chrome surface. Olivia Harrison's voice echoed faintly from the conference room ahead. Daniel hesitated at the door, then stepped inside. The air smelled of new coffee and ambition. Engineers in crisp shirts and tired eyes clustered around a long oval table, their laptops open like armor. The LED wall displayed data sets flowing in perfect synchronization, green bars moving in smooth rhythm. Olivia stood at the head of the table, posture straight, hair tied back into a low knot. The morning light cast soft lines across her face, stealing some of its usual severity. She tapped her tablet once, and the charts froze midstream. "Last night," she began, "a correction was made to our core model. The result: latency down 22 milliseconds, predictive accuracy up 18%. That puts us back on schedule for the Seattle demo." A ripple of quiet approval passed around the room. A few clapped weakly, most simply nodded. Daniel sat near the end of the table, feeling the warmth of sunlight creep across his hands. He didn't expect his name to be mentioned, but some small, childish part of him hoped anyway. Olivia continued, her tone professional. "We've all worked hard these past weeks, and I trust this team to keep our momentum." Her gaze moved around the table, but not toward him. "Let's ensure our success is repeatable, not accidental." The meeting rolled forward, all numbers and next steps. Daniel kept his eyes low, tracing a circle on his notepad where he'd drawn a rough version of the corrected equation. A soft ache settled behind his ribs, something between pride and invisibility. Mark Benson, the senior engineer across from him, cleared his throat. "If I may, it's reassuring that the model can still surprise us. Proof the architecture has untapped potential." Olivia nodded. "Potential only matters if someone notices it in time." Her words hung there for a second, brushing close enough to feel personal before moving on. Daniel's fingers tightened on the notebook. Someone noticed. Outside the windows, a gust of wind pressed faintly against the glass. The sky glowed pale amber, the same color as the morning light that used to pour into his old apartment on Alma Street, back when everything still felt possible. He closed his eyes, and the memory unfolded like film. He was 22 again, in a cluttered Stanford dorm room, a half-finished robotics prototype blinking on the desk. His wife, Leah, leaned against the doorway with a smile that could still quiet any storm. She'd brought him coffee, the smell filling the air. "You'll forget to eat if I don't bring you something," she said. He'd laughed, promising to take her to breakfast after the presentation. But he never got that chance. The next morning, her car spun out on the highway. Rain, black ice, a single phone call that split his life in two. He dropped out 2 weeks later, sold the prototype, took night jobs, and when Emily, their daughter, started school, she'd look up at him with her mother's same eyes and say, "Daddy, when the sun hits the window, it looks like the world is starting over." That was what this moment reminded him of now. The same fragile light, the same trembling promise of a restart. "Mr. Hayes." Daniel blinked. Olivia was looking at him from across the room. Her tone was neutral, but her gaze lingered just a fraction too long. "Any observations?" He cleared his throat. "Only that the code's stable. I'd recommend documenting the adjustment so it doesn't get overwritten in later builds." A few heads turned, surprised that the janitor was speaking at all. Mark Benson smirked faintly, but Olivia didn't interrupt. "Good suggestion," she said after a moment. "We'll include that in the review protocol." Her acknowledgement wasn't warmth, it was precision. But still, Daniel felt something steady under it. Recognition, maybe. Respect, if you squinted. The meeting wound down. People shuffled out, their voices returning to casual tones, as though the crisis had been nothing but bad weather. Daniel stayed behind for a moment, packing up his things. The morning light had climbed higher, painting the table's surface gold. Olivia stood by the window, watching the city's skyline blur beneath the sunlight. She didn't turn when she spoke. "You did well this morning." Daniel looked up. "Thank you, ma'am." Her reflection flickered in the glass, poised, unreadable. There's a difference between fixing a system and understanding why it broke. "I suspect you know both." He didn't answer. The compliment was subtle, almost invisible, but it landed all the same. When he left the room, the sun had fully crossed the glass wall, scattering reflections across the polished table. One of them caught Olivia's attention, a narrow streak of light running directly through Daniel's empty chair. She stared at it for a long moment, her own reflection merging with the glow until it became impossible to tell where the light ended and she began. The sun outside was mercilessly bright, but inside the 21st floor boardroom, the light felt sterile, white and hard, the kind that showed every flaw. The hum of the air conditioning filled the silence, broken only by the occasional clink of a pen or the faint squeak of leather as someone shifted in their chair. Daniel sat at one end of the long glass table, notebook open, hands folded tightly. He could see his own reflection staring back at him from the surface, an inverted image, quieter, smaller. Across from him, Mark Benson leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Between them, Olivia Harrison stood near the window, the skyline of San Francisco blurring behind her like a watercolor in motion. The meeting had already run 30 minutes past its scheduled time, and no one had raised their voice yet. But the tension had a pulse. Mark was the one to break the silence first. "I just want to make sure I understand what's happening here," said, his tone polite but cutting. "We're adjusting the predictive model based on the, what should I call it? The Hayes curve." Olivia didn't flinch. "You may call it whatever you like. It works." Mark's smile was quick and brittle. "Sure, it works now, but scaling it is another story. Neural instability under load is still a risk, and with all due respect, we're basing that risk on a he." Hesitated, eyes flicking toward Daniel. Janitor's intuition. Daniel's fingers tightened on his notebook. He had expected skepticism. He hadn't expected the word janitor to land like a slap. "I wasn't trying to override anyone," he said quietly. The loop logic was inverted. "I just flipped it back." Mark tilted his head, the gesture mockingly thoughtful. And you figure that out after? What, 5 years of sweeping floors? The words landed sharp and efficient. Olivia shifted slightly, but didn't intervene. Her expression remained unreadable. Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose. 5 years of cleaning rooms where smarter men were too tired to see straight, he said. His tone stayed calm, but something inside him cracked, a small sound only he could hear. Mark leaned forward, elbows on the table. You know, it's interesting, he said. A few years ago, I tried implementing a similar structure. Cost the company 6 months and $500,000. The system crashed so hard we had to rebuild from scratch. But now suddenly, someone who doesn't even have clearance past floor 10 has solved it overnight. Tell me, how exactly did you manage that? Daniel didn't move. I looked it backwards, he said simply. Mark's jaw tightened. He laughed, but it wasn't humor, it was disbelief. Of course you did. For the first time, Olivia spoke. Enough. The sound of her voice cut clean through the air. She moved to the table, resting her palms on the glass. The light from the window framed her like a statue caught between day and shadow. We're not here to measure whose ego fits the algorithm, she said. The data is stable. That's what matters. Mark didn't back down. Data is stable for now. But if this implementation fails under client stress testing, it won't be my name in the report. It'll be yours. Olivia met his eyes. Then you'd better hope it doesn't fail. The silence that followed was heavy, humming with unsaid things. The air felt thinner. Somehow, Daniel sat quietly, staring down at his reflection again. The glass table caught the glare of the overhead lights, washing his face in pale white. For a moment, he could almost see another version of himself, 20 years younger, full of certainty, before life had rubbed him down to the bone. He reached for his pen, then stopped. You don't have to believe me, he said finally, voice low, but you could believe the math. Mark scoffed, leaning back. The math doesn't explain how you even knew where to look. Daniel hesitated, eyes still on the table. Because I've made the same mistake before, he said softly, just not with code. That caught Olivia's attention. She looked at him, the faintest flicker of curiosity crossing her face, but Daniel said no more. Mark pushed his chair back with a screech that cut through the stillness. Fine, run your model. But when it breaks, I'll be the one cleaning it up. He gathered his tablet and walked out, the door closing too sharply behind him. Olivia stayed where she was, motionless. The sunlight had shifted, half of her face glowing in the glare, the other half sinking into shadow. Daniel finally stood, collecting his notebook and the pen that had rolled halfway down the table. I'll recheck the load testing numbers, he said, just to be sure. You don't have to, Olivia replied. He paused at the doorway. I know. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the air vent filled the silence again, constant and cold. Olivia's gaze followed him as he stepped into the corridor. The light from the window stretched a shadow across the polished floor, a long, uneven silhouette that trailed behind him like a second life, trying to keep up. When the door clicked shut, Olivia turned toward the glass. The reflection staring back at her was divided perfectly by sunlight, one half bright, one half dark. She stood there, watching both halves flicker in the glare, as if unsure which one belonged to her. The fog had already begun to roll in from the bay by the time Daniel reached North Beach. Street lights swam in gold halos, their reflections trembling on the pavement. The city, which only hours ago buzzed with traffic and deadlines, now moved in whispers. He spotted the restaurant easily. It was the only one on the block that looked as though it hadn't changed in 30 years. A bell chimed softly when he stepped inside, the sound swallowed by the mellow trumpet of Chet Baker drifting from an old radio behind the counter. Warm light pooled over worn wooden tables, painting everything in shades of honey and amber. The air smelled faintly of roasted garlic, red wine, and something older, a trace of stale coffee that clung to the walls. Like memory, Olivia Harrison was already there, seated by the window, the fog outside pressed against the glass, soft and white, making her reflection seem almost translucent. Her hair was down once, falling over her shoulders in loose waves. The severe edges of her suit had been replaced by a pale gray sweater. Daniel hesitated before approaching, unsure if this was an invitation or an evaluation. She looked up. "You found it. Couldn't miss it," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "The only place in the city that smells like the past." A faint smile touched her lips. "That's why I like it." The waiter brought 2 glasses of wine, deep red and slow, to catch the light. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The room hummed with quiet life, the murmur of other diners, the faint clink of silverware, the trumpet stretching each note as if it didn't want to end. Olivia broke the silence first. "Do you ever wonder how people end up where they do?" Daniel tilted his glass, watching the reflection of the light ripple across the surface. "Every day, though I try not to think too hard about it. Some answers don't come with explanations." She nodded slightly, eyes still on the window. "When I was a kid, my mother used to tell me emotion is a luxury. She said people like us, people who wanted to be in charge, didn't have the right to feel things deeply. So I learned to file it away." Daniel smiled faintly. "And how's that working out?" Olivia's laugh was quiet, brittle at the edges. "I built a company, lost a marriage, and haven't had a real conversation in 3 years, give or take." He leaned back, letting the jazz fill the pause. "Maybe that's what you wanted at the time. Control. Control," she repeated, rolling the words slowly. "You make it sound like a curse. Sometimes it is." The waiter set down a small plate of bread between them. Olivia tore a piece and passed it across the table. Their fingers brushed lightly, enough to notice, not enough to linger. "What about you?" she asked. "Why is a Stanford AI student mopping corporate floors?" Daniel looked down at the bread in his hand, then at the candle flickering in its holder. The flame bent, reflected twice in the glass. "Life happened faster than my plans," he said. "My wife died in a car crash. I left school. My daughter was 3. I needed work that let me be home at night." Olivia's voice softened. "I am sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. Emily's the reason I still get up every day. She has this thing she does when she wakes up, sits by the window, and waits for the light to hit her face. Says it's the world's way of telling her it's starting over." Something flickered behind Olivia's expression, an emotion too private to name. "She sounds kind." "She's 6, he said with a small chuckle. Kindness still comes naturally at that age. They ate quietly for a while. The warmth of the food, the low hum of conversation, and the fog pressing gently against the glass all wrapped the moment in a fragile calm. "You know," Olivia said after a long silence, "when I saw you that night in the conference room, I thought you were out of line. Touching the code, stepping into something you weren't invited to. But the truth is," she paused, searching for the words, "you reminded me of someone I used to be, someone who still believed problems could be solved with logic instead of fear." Daniel met her eyes. "Maybe it's not too late to be that person again." Her lips curved faintly. "You really think people change?" "I think they remember who they were before the noise drowned it out." Olivia looked down at her glass. The candlelight danced across the red surface, splitting into tiny shards of reflection on the rim. "You talk like someone who still has faith in people." "Not always," Daniel said. "Just in what they can build if they stop pretending not to care." Outside, the fog thickened, cloaking the street in white. The windows steamed at the corners. Somewhere nearby, a taxi horn sounded once and faded away. When they stood to leave, the air outside was colder, scented faintly of rain. Olivia slipped her coat around her shoulders, and for a moment they just stood there under the awning, listening to the city breathe. Daniel adjusted his bag. "You pick quiet places. They make it easier to hear the truth," she said. He smiled. And what truth was tonight? That sometimes the janitor understands systems better than the people who build them. Her tone was wry, but there was warmth beneath it. They started walking toward opposite directions, then slowed almost in unison. Olivia turned slightly, looking back over her shoulder. "Tomorrow, there's a client demonstration. It could make or break the company. Be there. Daniel nodded. Wouldn't miss it. The street glistened beneath the mist. The yellow glow of the lamps stretching their shadows long and side by side. Two silhouettes moving through the same fog, neither leading, neither following, just walking quietly toward whatever light might still be waiting at the end of the street. The conference hall gleamed like a surgical theater, bright, white, and coldly perfect. Rows of monitors reflected the light in sterile fragments, and every cable on the floor lay coiled with mathematical precision. The hum of servers under the raised platform sounded like the pulse of something enormous and alive. At the front of the room, Olivia Harrison stood behind the podium, her voice even and composed. Today, Harrison Robotics is proud to demonstrate a new frontier in adaptive neural learning, she said, her words clipped but confident. What you're about to see isn't just performance, it's evolution. The audience, clients from Seattle, investors from Palo Alto, a few journalists, sat in polite expectation. Their pens were ready. Their smiles were thin. Behind the glass partition, Daniel Hayes adjusted the headset over his ears. His fingers hovered above the control keyboard, the faint tremor in his hands disguised his motion. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, a faint line of sweat darkening the fabric. "Ready, Hayes?" came the technician's whisper over the intercom. Daniel nodded once. "Ready." The countdown flashed on the main screen. 3, 2, 1. The system roared to life. Data poured across the monitors in graceful streams of green and white. The predictive model ran through simulations in real time, adjusting and learning, each cycle faster than the last. On the main LED wall, curves rose and stabilized. For a few perfect minutes, everything worked. Then, without warning, a flicker. A thin yellow warning bar blinked across the display. Daniel's stomach dropped. Buffer lag detected. 30 milliseconds, the technician said sharply. "It'll stabilize," Daniel muttered. But it didn't. The lag climbed 40, 50, 60. The smooth rhythm of the simulation began to stutter. Olivia, mid-sentence, paused as the LED behind her shifted from white to amber. The room grew colder. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Mark Benson, seated near the front, leaned forward. His voice was pitched just loud enough. "I warned you. It's not stable under load." Olivia's hand tightened subtly around the edge of the podium. She didn't look at him. Her gaze found Daniel instead, through glass, through noise, through pressure. "Hayes!" Her voice came through. The intercom calm but edged. "What's happening?" He swallowed hard. "Memory overflow. I can patch it manually, but we'll need to stop the run." "Stopping isn't an option," Olivia said. "Fix it." Her words weren't an order. They were an anchor. Daniel stared at the code streaming across the monitor. It felt alive, too alive, pulsing like it was gasping for air. One wrong adjustment, and the entire system would crash, taking the company's future with it. He heard Emily's voice in his head. "When the sun hits the window, it looks like the world is starting over." He exhaled once. "All right, let's start over." He leaned forward, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The clicks came fast, urgent, deliberate, the rhythm of someone rebuilding logic mid-collapse. Sweat ran down his temple. The fans above him began to whine, air thickening with the metallic scent of overheating circuits. Then something in the syntax caught his eye. A tiny pattern buried deep in the code base. Structured exactly like an old training algorithm he hadn't written himself. He froze. Recognition flickered. He had borrowed that pattern months ago from an open-source model published years earlier by Professor Raymond Lang, his former AI instructor at Stanford. Up on stage, Olivia watched the code scroll by on the monitor. Her breath hitched. She knew that pattern. She had studied under Lang too, long before she built Harrison Robotics. It was the same recursive mapping he'd shown her the night before he died, the one he'd called the bridge between human intuition and machine logic. Her eyes widened, not from panic but realization. The room seemed to shrink, the noise dimming until all she could hear was the rhythmic tapping of Daniel's keys. That pattern wasn't coincidence. It was connection. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "Lang." Daniel pressed enter. The screen blinked once, amber to white, then finally, mercifully, to green. The silence that followed was total. Then the graphs surged upward. Latency dropped to 0. The main simulation resumed its smooth rotation, every node syncing in perfect rhythm. The lights, which had dimmed with the failure, brightened in a slow, breathtaking wave, yellow to pale gold to calm, glowing blue. Applause broke out, reluctant at first, then stronger. The clients leaned forward, murmuring approval. Mark Benson's expression cracked somewhere between disbelief and reluctant respect. Olivia didn't move. She stood at the podium, eyes still on Daniel, who sat motionless behind the glass. Headset half off, chest rising and falling as though he'd just resurfaced from deep water. He looked up. Their eyes met. Through the glass, through the reflections, something passed between them that didn't belong to algorithms or contracts. It was recognition, the quiet kind that says, "I see you. I remember." Olivia finally turned back to the audience. Her voice, when it returned, was steady again. "As you can see," she said, "our system adapts dynamically under stress. We call it resilience." The applause grew louder. Cameras flashed, but Olivia barely heard any of it. Her focus stayed fixed on Daniel, the man who had brought back to life not just her company's failing machine, but something she'd buried in herself long ago. When the crowd dispersed and the last handshake was done, the hall emptied into a silence that smelled faintly of ozone and cooling wires. Olivia walked backstage, heels echoing sharply on the tile. Daniel was still there, unplugging the last set of cables. He looked up when she approached, tired but smiling faintly. "System stable now." Olivia stopped beside him. The light above flickered between white and soft blue, brushing both their faces in, alternating calm and shadow. The faint aroma of old coffee lingered from the technician's station, blending strangely with the ozone, a human scent amid the machines. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just watched him. Then, quietly, she said, "That recursive map you used, it was Raymond Lang's, wasn't it?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, he taught me to trust the math, even when I didn't trust myself." Olivia's voice softened, distant. "He taught me that too." They stood there, facing each other, connected by a ghost neither had expected to find again. The machines behind them hummed steadily, alive, breathing. Finally, Olivia stepped closer, her tone breaking the fragile quiet. "You fixed more than the system today." Daniel looked at her, and in her eyes, bright blue under the shifting light, he saw something new. Not the CEO, not the skeptic, just a woman rediscovering faith in the people who built things with their hands and their hearts. The light turned green and stayed there, humming softly like a promise that had finally been kept. The city glowed like an ember beneath a veil of fog. From the rooftop of Harrison Robotics, the Bay Bridge stretched into the mist, its cables lit in threads of gold that shimmered across the water. Below, the hum of the city was faint but constant, a soft, steady heartbeat, the same rhythm that had carried them through sleepless nights and too many second chances. Daniel Hayes stood near the railing, his jacket unbuttoned, the cool air brushing against his face. The mop leaned beside him, the same one he'd used every night. 4 or 5 years, its handle polished smooth by repetition. Behind him, the elevator doors opened with a quiet hiss. Olivia Harrison stepped out, wrapped in a long camel coat. The light from the rooftop lamps turned her hair a shade of burnished copper, catching the fog like smoke. "You don't sleep either," she said. Daniel smiled without turning. "I tried. The machines are quieter than my thoughts." Olivia walked to stand beside him. The wind caught the edge of her coat, lifting it gently. "Beautiful night," she said, her voice low, almost thoughtful. "You can see just enough to believe the rest is still out there." Daniel looked over at her, then back to the skyline. "Kind of like code," he murmured. "You can't see every line, but you trust it'll connect somewhere. For a while, neither of them spoke. The hum of the building's generators filled the silence, soft, steady, peaceful. Down below, the company that had nearly collapsed 3 days ago now buzzed with quiet triumph. The system was holding. The data had stabilized. The impossible had become routine. Finally, Olivia turned to him. "The board met this afternoon," she said. "They've approved a new development team, smaller, more agile, less bureaucracy." Daniel's eyes flicked toward her, cautious. "You're on it," she continued. "Officially, full benefits, project authority. Your title will be Senior Systems Analyst." He blinked, the words taking a moment to land. "I don't even own a suit," he said finally. "Good," she replied. "We've got enough suits already." He laughed softly. The sound mixed with the wind and faded into the night. "You're serious?" "As serious as I get." Her tone was dry, but her eyes weren't cold. "You earned it, Daniel. You didn't just fix a system. You reminded this place what people can still do when they care." Daniel leaned against the railing, shaking his head with a slow smile. 5 years ago, if someone told me, I'd be standing up. You're talking to the CEO? I'd have said they needed a reboot." Olivia smiled back. 5 years ago, I would have agreed." A silence followed. Not awkward, but full. Somewhere below, a faint whir of automated floor polishers echoed faintly through the vents. The sound was rhythmic, familiar. Daniel recognized it instantly. The same tone, the same soft hum that always played when he cleaned the lower floors after midnight. It carried through the metal and glass like a lullaby to the tired and unseen. "Machine's still running," he said quietly. "Good sign. They're steady now," Olivia said. "Balanced." Her eyes drifted toward the distant bay. The lights from the bridge shimmered in her pupils, small and trembling. She said, "Lang once told me the hardest thing about leadership wasn't building something new. It was remembering why you started." Daniel nodded slowly. "He told me that too. I just forgot until recently." The wind picked up, sweeping through the rooftop garden, carrying the faint scent of rain. A few drops began to fall, soft, almost invisible. One landed on Daniel's cheek. He wiped it away, not sure if it was rain or something else. He reached for the mop beside him, running his hand along the wooden handle. "Guess it's done its part too," he said with a half smile. Olivia glanced at it, then at him. "You could retire it. Keep it as a reminder." Daniel shook his head. "No, it's better this way." He stepped forward, crouched slightly, and began to wipe a thin line of water from the concrete floor. The motion was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. The lamp above them flickered once, then steadied, bathing the rooftop in a soft golden hue. He looked up at her, eyes calm, voice low. Sometimes the mop in overlooked. Hands, lights the whole room. Olivia didn't reply at first. She just watched him, the light reflecting in her eyes. Then she smiled, the kind that doesn't need words to carry meaning. Below, the hum of the building deepened into a smooth, steady rhythm. The same tone that had filled the hallways on the first night he'd found the error. The same whisper of motion, now peaceful instead of panicked. Daniel stood beside her again. Together, they looked out at the city, its lights shimmering beneath the fog like scattered stars trying to find their place. "Tomorrow," Olivia said softly, "we start fresh." Daniel nodded. "Tomorrow," he echoed. The wind swept past them, gentle and cool. The faint echo of machinery hummed through the walls, a sound neither harsh nor mechanical anymore, but alive, human. And as the fog thickened and the golden lights shimmered through it, the rooftop fell quiet, holding only the hum of balance restored, the sound of a world quietly beginning again.